Well, it's episode 36 of Soul Care with Stevie Boy. I'm grateful that you joined me. I'm always humbled by the idea that anybody would, especially come back. I'm grateful if you're finding that there's some good stuff in Scripture here. It's not about me uncovering nuggets you never would have seen for yourself. It's basically about me helping you see what is there that you probably would have seen for yourself. So, anyway, okay. We're in Philippians chapter 3. And last episode, we talked about how Paul, one of the things that grieved Paul, he said he told the Philippians, even with tears, that there are those who are enemies of the cross. And he was direct and he didn't use any soft language. Listen, he says, for this is beginning in verse 18, for as I've often told you before, and now tell you again, even with tears, many live as enemies of the cross of Christ. Their destiny is destruction, their God is their stomach, and their glory is their shame. Their mind is set on earthly things. I talked a little bit last time about having one's mind set on earthly things. I think it comes down to this. If my mind is set on earthly things, it really comes to this. My mind is set on me. See, here's the thing. Earthly things only have a value relative to what I want. They only matter because I want them. If I don't want them, they don't matter, right? It's kind of we have a very broken perspective on so many things. But when we have our mind set on earthly things, that sets our only context. Our context is now, what I can see now, what I want now, what I feel like now. It is all about now, me. That's pretty strong, but I think it happens to be true. And I mentioned to you last time that in Colossians chapter 3, the first two verses, Paul says, set your mind on things above, not on things below. Set your heart on things above. In other words, set your intellect and your will. Your heart, in ancient times, the metaphor of the heart was used for where your affections reside, where your will is, where your emotions are. If you set your heart and your mind, you're setting everything about you other than your physical body towards something. When our hearts and minds are set on things above, that's the only safeguard really that we have against being held hostage by now, me, things of this world. Paul goes on and contrasts people who they are held hostage in this way, people who have their minds set on earthly things. He goes on in verse 20, but our citizenship is in heaven. My wife Debbie and I get to travel a good bit, but we get to serve as member care directors. That's kind of a fancy word for the idea that we give pastoral care to the staff of Open Door Libraries. And we go to their locations. We go to Berlin and Prague and to the Middle East to give spiritual, emotional, physical care and support to our directors and staff at these three libraries outside the United States. And we love it. It's a blessing for us to be able to do this. And one of the blessings is if you've ever traveled abroad, you know one of the great blessings of a ministry of this kind is that we have a great reason to travel abroad. We don't go on vacation when we travel abroad, but you can hardly escape the fact that when you go to these three places, there is tons and tons of history and beauty and art in all three of these places. And it's a blessing for us to be able to be there and do that. We love how it feels to us to be able to hang out with our Open Door Library staff and take them to places they wouldn't eat. It's too expensive, and to bring encouragement and help, and we love what that feels like. But you know what? By about day 12, usually we were out for about a month at a time, and by about day 12, I'm ready to be back where I can sleep in my own bed, when I can watch my TV where there's American TV programming. I can drive my vehicle on streets I know, on and on it goes. Up until this year, when we went abroad, we left and returned through Chicago. And there is something interesting that happened in me every time we returned and went down the escalators from our arrival gate down where the passport control and re-entry into America is. And there's a huge American flag on the wall. And when I saw that flag, there was something, I don't know how to describe it. It was like a flutter in my soul, in my heart, of pride and gratitude, and thinking, I'm home. Although it was still 4 hours before we get back to our house, but it felt I was home. This is my home, this United States. There's tons of stuff wrong with it, and you can take shots in any direction at things that are wrong and ought to be changed and aren't right. Yeah, absolutely. But I'm convinced, and I get more convinced every time we go abroad and come home, this is the best country on earth to live in. For me, it is. And I'm grateful that my citizenship is here. That's just a shadow of what Paul was talking about when he said, but our citizenship is in heaven. I think that's a real strong picture of how we should perceive ourselves and our lives. If my citizenship is in heaven, then wherever I am, I will act according to my citizenship. When we're abroad, my wife and I, although we try to be sensitive to the cultures that we find ourselves in, we're still Americans. We act like Americans. And in a unique way, we're ambassadors for America. So that instead of when we leave, people go, ugh, Americans, ugh. What I hope is that when we leave, people, wherever we have been, will say, you know, those Americans are kind people and thoughtful. I want my shadow or my thumbprint or whatever you want to call it. I want the backwash of my being there to leave a thumbprint of what an American citizen is like. Shouldn't that be the case for us Christians? We live here, but our citizenship is in heaven. And because of that, shouldn't we leave some backwash of heaven where we are? Shouldn't we leave a thumbprint of what a citizen of heaven would do and how they would be where we are? Absolutely. I know that there's an old saying that says, he's so heavenly minded, he's no earthly good. Honestly, I'd rather be that way than for it to be said, he is so earthly minded, he's no heavenly good. Paul says that's what these people who are enemies, living as enemies of the cross of Christ, are like. They are so earthly minded, they're no heavenly good. Don't lose sight of the fact that our citizenship is in heaven. That's where we belong. When I was a little boy, we used to, it was called Christian Endeavor. And later, years later, it began to be called Youth Group. But we had some of the crummiest, hokiest, stupidest songs that we always sang. And one that at the time, well, it wasn't, I can't say my favorite, but has become a favorite of mine. And you probably know it. This world is not my home. I'm just passing through. My treasures are laid up somewhere beyond the blue. The angels beckon me from heaven's open doors, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. I feel this way more now than I ever have in my life. There was a point in my life when I was younger where selfishly I prayed, oh, Lord, don't come back yet. There's too much I haven't done. I have too much yet that I want to experience and do. And I'm sure God understood. And I don't think he rejected me because I was immature. But in my life now, and partly it's because I've done a whole lot of what I had hoped I would do in my life. And my kids are grown and living amazing and wonderful lives and serving Christ and loving their spouses. And I have grandkids that are growing up in Christ to know him and love him. I have a wonderful wife. I feel fulfilled in my career. I've kind of gotten mostly where I wanted to go. Although there's way more yet to do, I hope. But I find myself more and more desiring to be where I am truly a citizen. The last two chapters of Revelation describe, mainly in symbolic language, because how do you describe the indescribable? Well, you have to use symbols that come as close as you can come to describing it. And those last two chapters of Revelation describe our home. This is where our citizenship lies, where God will wipe away every tear. There'll be no more crying. There'll be no more pain. Where the trees of life bloom and blossom nonstop on the banks of the river of life, and the leaves of the trees are for the healing of the nations. Read it for yourself. Read it and do the best you can to see yourself there, because that's where you are a citizen. Not here. As good as life is here, and frankly, even during this COVID-19 outbreak, yeah, things are less good than they could be, but frankly, we got it really good here, folks. Look around. Go to Bangladesh or India or Africa. Go to Mexico, for crying out loud. We've got it good. But this isn't all there is. And we have to remind ourselves of that constantly. Maybe I should say it this way. I have to remind myself of this constantly. This world is not my home. I'm just a passing through. How do you do that? Well, start here with the last two chapters of Revelation. Read it sometime today. Before your head hits the pillow at the close of the day, read those two chapters. Slowly, maybe even out loud to yourself. Then here's a little more difficult, is reflect on your life and ask God to reveal to you the things you need to hold more loosely. Because if we're holding tightly to them, that's a sign that our mind is set on things of earth. I want to hold my things. I want to steward them well, but I want to hold them with loose hands. And I want that for everybody I know and love. Well, that's what I've got for today. Just one verse, but boy, don't forget, you guys and you gals, you cats and kittens. Our citizenship isn't here. It's in heaven. I'll hope to connect with you next time on Soul Care with Stevie Boy.